Hi, I'm Sean Basie, or Saint Facetious, author of the Facetious Guide series, namely Facetious Guide to Prague, which I've just reformatted. Much better situation going on in the interior. And I've also updated for 2025, going through all the listings to make sure they're still valid or didn't survive COVID. Oops. Also, I've got an upcoming book, A Facetious Guide to Traveling with Your Kid, which I've used all of my mistakes and anecdotes there to write you a book about the best practices and worst practices when you're traveling with your kid. Today, I'm going to talk about the Battle of Bastogne, though. Not really in detail about the battle, but about a museum we went to last weekend in Bastogne, Belgium, which is I have to say it's one of the best museums I've been to, I think. It's definitely, it's pretty awesome. I'll get to it. And I'm actually going to share some pictures and videos this time, unlike last time where I was just like, hey, head to the blog. Actually, if you do want to see more videos, and check out more pictures, do head to the blog. I've got slightly different information there because here I'm just blabbing on and on as I do. Anyways, the Battle of Bastogne was in 1944, began in December, just to set you up for the museum, okay? Because you do need a little background information to truly get what I'm talking about. At the museum, they of course go through all this, it's an educational experience, as well as it should be. It is a museum, so there you go. So the Battle of Bastogne was in 1944 in December, and part of the background is that the Allies had just steamrolled through the Nazis all the way into Belgium, and here we had made a base, like the 101st Airborne specifically made their base in Bastogne, and when the Nazis, Hitler was thinking, man, I can cut off these Allies by their supply lines, because these guys, they're going too quick, so if I just cut off their supply lines, then they'll collapse. And then they can come to the bargaining table, we can have peace, because really all Hitler wanted was peace, right? That's like the same as Putin. That's all Putin wants is peace, as long as it's, to their benefit. They don't care about to the benefit of the people they're destroying. Keep that in mind when Putin talks about peace. It's not to the people of the Donbass or to the Ukrainian peoples or even the Russian peoples there. It's not to their benefit. Just as Hitler continuing to rule Germany was not to the real benefit of the people living in Germany, it was to Hitler's benefit. And if peace had come at that point in time, it definitely wouldn't have been to the German people's benefit. It would have been to, you guessed it, Hitler's benefit. So in Bastogne, back to Bastogne, Hitler's forces, the Wehrmacht, were going to drive up to Antwerp, which was one of the main supply hubs of the Allied armies at that point. And if they retook Antwerp, then they would have been able to disrupt and destroy a large hub of their supply chain. So they're going to move in on there. And Bastogne was kind of in the way between the German lines and Antwerp. The Allies didn't really think the Germans had that many guys coming in, but because of the bad weather, because of some bad intel, there was a lot of things going on with the fog of war where they didn't really think the Germans were going to make an advance. It turns out the Germans had like 500,000 soldiers sitting there and a buttload of tanks and artillery, and they just drove in and tried to overwhelm the Allies. But the Americans were at Bastogne and they held firm. And this led to what is also called the Battle of the Bulge, which is the largest tank army that the United States has ever fought in. Kursk may have been larger, so I can't say in history, or even of the entire war, but the United States in the Western War. And you can see evidence of this if you go hiking around like Bastogne or in the mountains, the hills of the Ardennes. Are they called mountains? I think some people do call them mountains. It's very sweet. Anyways, if you go hiking out there, you can find random tanks. They're just sitting there in the forest, overgrown with vines and graffiti and stuff. It's very, it can be weird. Even in Bastogne itself, there's a Sherman tank right in the main square, kind of as a dedication to the American contribution there. And so you have what ensued was the largest tank battle, and that is what the Battle of the Bulge was famous for. I can't say much more than that. I mean, that is what made it famous. Now, this museum specifically was for the 101st Airborne, which was a division in the United States Army that started back in World War I and was kind of reorganized in World War II. And these guys, these were pretty hardcore dudes because they'd flown over the enemy lines, dropped down by parachutes while they're getting shot at, and finally they get down, and then they gotta just do what they can to take out as many Nazis as they could. I think a very factual based movie on this was Inglourious Bastards. No, not fact at all. But it was a great movie. I don't think it was about the 101st. It was just about a bunch of crazy nuts with baseball bats smashing Nazis. It's a pretty good film. So this museum was dedicated to the 101st Airborne. And it's called the 101st Airborne Museum. You can find it in Bastogne. And it's in a former Belgian mess hall, officers' mess hall. And it was never used by the 101st Airborne. It was used by the Nazis, the Nazi officer corps, Unteroffizieren, which is like the lower officers. And it was bought in 2009 by two Belgians, and they refurbished it and put it in place into this museum. Now, the museum itself, it's got to be one of the most incredible museums I've ever been to, hands down. And you get in, the first floor is just kind of basic museum-iness. Is they've got a big like table with a map, and you can pretend you're planning the battle and take your Instagram pictures there, I guess, depending on what kind of Instagram you've got. And they've got paraphernalia along the walls, like different tokens, flasks or pins or cigarette cases, whatever the soldiers were using. That has been found and recovered in the area. And then they also have, what's cool is Patton's, General Patton's uniform right there. That's pretty cool. And then over on another wall, they've got like the written orders of the German, to the German officers and their groups about going on, written by the Führer himself. And he's, basically writing a motivational letter about killing the enemy. It's just bizarre when you look at things from the other side. Like the average guy on the bad guy side doesn't think he's a bad guy, and a lot of the messaging is very similar to the messaging that we have. And so I think any philosopher would be looking back and self-reflecting to make sure, are we in fact the good guys at all times? Now, I'm not arguing in World War II. Obviously we were the good guys because the Nazis were, but the Nazis were convinced they were doing the right thing too. And some Germans opened their eyes. They realized they were the bad guys, but not all Germans. Some thought they were doing good. And that's the really messed up thing about a lot of these wars that go on through history, and a lot of what's going on now is that people on both sides think they're the good guys. So really part of winning a war is convincing the other side that, hey, you're not the good guy, you're the bad guy. And the other side, the people there, understanding that, because nobody wants to be the bad guy. But you look at the Russian-Ukraine war, for instance. In Russia, the Russians do think they're doing the right thing in Ukraine. So the trick to winning that war and the trick to winning a sustainable peace after that war isn't to just berate Russians about their toilet theft and washing machine theft. It's to make Russians understand that they're not on the good side of this war. And on that token, we need to understand our own excesses. We have to look back towards ourselves too. In order to convince other people, you have to be willing to self-reflect. And this is the hardest part of the Russian propaganda, because it really plays off our own bad things that we've done and that we don't want to own up to. But if we own up to it, then we can show the hypocrisy of the Russian propaganda. But if we don't own up to it, then we're kind of stuck in a hole, because we can say, we did do that, but we love freedom. It's tough. Thank God I'm not an intelligence officer. That's not my job. My job is to get a job. So if you're hiring, let me know. So back to Bastogne and the 101st Museum. So you get there's that room right there, and then you get to the upstairs and the next upstairs. So it's 3 stories up and then 1 story down, and those are the really cool floors, the other floors, because what they've done, instead of just using display cases, they've made whole dioramas of life-size dioramas with mannequins, like really looking, like realistic looking mannequins, wearing the actual uniforms, holding the actual equipment, using holding the actual guns and all that. That's the display, not just a standard display case. And that's really, really neatly set up. And in some places, like, they've really gone an extra step to make the atmosphere. Like one room, they've got guys huddled, some military guys huddled in what seems like a barn, and one guy has his like leg up, and he's looking out with a sniper rifle out of the window, and then you can hear bombs overhead. And that was up on the 3rd floor. And at that point, my kid, we brought my 5-year-old to a war museum. At that point, he was like, "Oh, this is freaking me out," and then he like refused to go any further, and he went to the 1st floor, and then my wife had to take him down there. And that was one of the best practices of museum life I've found, that like I don't think you should skip museum experiences or learning experiences or mini experiences just because you have a kid. You should still do what you want to do. Just be mindful that you do have a kid. And so, we had to take turns to see things, and then one of us entertain the kid, the other go and see what there is to see at the museum. So on that top floor, there was that little nest, I guess you could say. And then there was another room where it was a bunch of Nazis in another farm-looking building. And then there was another room that really impressed me. It was like a bar room where all these guys were kind of GIs were partying at a bar, and you had like their cigarettes, the Lucky Strikes, and the different bottles of beer, Belgian beers, and it's just really interesting setup to see. Kind of really helps you show what life was like in those situations. The bottom floor. Now this floor, thank goodness we did not take my kid in, because this was like the real horror show, is down at the bottom floor. Like, not horror show in the sense of Clockwork Orange, where it means good, horrorshow in Russian. That's why if any of you have read Clockwork Orange, you would know that. That's where horror show comes from. Anyways, down in the basement, they have like really graphic and intense dioramas. They've got one where it's some Nazis that broke into somebody's house and the interrogation went wrong, and they're stabbing and murdering people, stabbing with the bayonets. The other room, there's a surgery, kind of a wartime surgery, where they're amputating a leg and there's blood everywhere and there's guys freaking out, and it's just really graphic and detailed. And hopefully I'm showing you the pictures. If I miss a picture, you'll see more pictures actually down in my blog. Follow the link. Also, if you are going to Prague, do look into one of my books here, Czechia or Prague. Just had to show my sponsor, which I am the sponsor. But the real piece of the real like crown jewel of the museum, I'd say, is this room where it's like a bombing simulation room. And what they have, like, you get in there and you see a bench here, and a couple holes in the wall. And through the holes is another diorama setup. But the diorama setup is of a family huddled in a basement and with a kind of makeshift living room kitchen setup in the basement. And what it is a shelter, like a makeshift bomb shelter. And so you're in the next door makeshift bomb shelter, I guess you would say. And you have windows on the back, covered windows by blinds. And then everything turns dark. And, it says, you hear a narrator saying, "This was my experience in 1944 Bastogne. I thought everything was good." And then the bombs came. And then you start hearing like the planes overhead, the sirens. You hear some people on the street, some cars shutting their door, some car lights you see, some screams, and then the bombs start coming down. And then just boom, 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 boom. You hear the flak going, bah, 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 like all that stuff. And like all around you, just the sound system, pristine. It's just shaking your heart. You see like, you hear the people in the next room from the diorama, right? and then you hear like babies crying. You see the lamp is swaying overhead. It's a pretty intense experience. It's about 15 minutes. And it's really an incredible thing to see. So I think if you ever like in Belgium looking for a war museum, like looking for World War II, World War I, because a lot of the battles were fought here in Belgium, a lot of the more extreme battles, then definitely take a look at the 101st Airborne Museum. I think is one of the best military museums on that the 20th century world wars that you can find. And then, the next I think was pretty cool was the Trench of Death Museum, which is up in Flanders, in the Flanders Fields. That's World War I. So I have a blog on that. I'll post a link to. Definitely check one of those out. It's not really for kids if you're traveling with kids, but I think it is something that you shouldn't miss. Now, Bastogne itself is really weird as an American. Like, when you're traveling as an American, you're not... People like Americans. They're generally positive towards Americans. I would say that's maybe rapidly changing to the other side, especially as we discontinue things like USAID. And I don't want this to become a political blog or anything, but traveling a lot, especially if you travel through third world countries, you see what the aid is doing. Okay, right, firsthand, not from some guy named Big Balls telling you that it's sending condoms to Gaza, $50 million of condoms. Okay, first of all, $50 million of condoms, really, like, how many condoms do you think these people are using in Gaza? They're not $50 million. Like, how many freaking condoms is $50 million condoms? Think about it, guys. Obviously, this is not accurate information. I don't care what Big Balls is telling you. It's not accurate information. Anyways, you go to third world countries. You see, okay, this road was built with USAID money. Big sign right there. There's always big signs because they want to advertise. Because what is USAID? Okay, it is a goodwill mission. Like, it does give a lot of goodwill, but it's advertising. It's like purchasing an SEM, search engine advertisement right on the top of a Google browser, except it comes along with toilets or roads or food or trainings and all that. Like, a lot of cities and states rely on donations. So yeah, you drive through Palestine. Okay, you might see a road that's USAID built, or you go to, when I was in Bethlehem, okay, the church of where Jesus was born was there. Like, the refurbishment was helped paid for by USAID. The plaza in front was helped paid for by USAID. And when I was in Georgia, like one of the refugee camps, the IDP camps, sorry. That the toilets there were helped paid for by USAID. Like, it does so much good stuff, and it buys the sympathy and friendship of so many people, and it really makes America look like the shining state on a hill that we say we are. Okay, now, not doing anything, then we're not anything if we don't do anything. Okay, if we just collapse inward like a cupboard, all we are is a closed cupboard. That's it. Nobody likes just a chest of junk. Okay, you got to share that junk, and then people love it. Otherwise, people don't give a crap about you. And we're in an international world right now. We rely on the goodwill of other people as well. The good trade relations we rely on. Like, if you want your cheap Amazon overnight, that comes with the cost of making sure global supply chains are free and navigable. It comes with the cost of making sure that our people abroad are not in danger from terrorists and from other groups that would wish us harm. Like your comfortable life, unfortunately, revolves around American empire. Like, an American empire is not always a bad thing because it comes with toilets, it comes with jobs, it comes with roads, it comes with things people depend on. And when you live life a lot on the periphery of the United States and European Union power, along with like between that and Russia, and you live along Ukraine or travel along Ukraine and Baltics and Georgia and the Caucasus, you see that it's a very stark decision. Like, these people aren't being bent by American propaganda necessarily. They're being more bent out of the fear of Russia. They lived under the Soviet Union, like their fathers and their fathers' fathers. Almost all of them have some sort of story about the Gulag, the labor camps, political assassinations, of political imprisonment. That they all have that in their family story. And you have to remember that, like, we are the choice. We are their choice. They wanted to join NATO. They want to join NATO. It's not that we're forcing them on it. Like, we're not taking over territories. It's people are joining us because they love us. Like, and they're terrified of the other thing that would take them if not for NATO and if not for the United States. So when you look around Bastogne, you see all these American flags, and you're like, man, I feel good about my country. Like, we do a lot of good. World War II was a lot of good. And a bit of more of an introflexion. Like, we qualify everything about our contribution to World War II. We won World War II, but also the Soviets won World War II. And they qualify everything. All the bad stuff they did is not so bad because we won World War II. We liberated everyone, and then we enslaved them. Ha ha. So yeah, there's both, like, we both use that in our propaganda so much, and it's kind of just like when you see how much Russians are pushing that propaganda of they won World War II, you're kind of like, yeah, we do the same. What are we covering up? And we are covering up a lot of stuff. So, but that doesn't mean we should just stop being a force for good. That means we need to be a force for better, right? We need to improve ourselves as well, which I think is totally possible. And and that's what I'm hoping for. Like I said, I don't want to get too political. I don't want to name names. Like, everyone's got faults and stuff. So I'll just leave it at that. But in Bastogne, it feels cool seeing all those flags. But then you look up and you see what's flying those flags. There's little souvenir shops that are just selling, like, American World War II paraphernalia, souvenirs, like, made in China. So that's kind of funny. Especially when you're coming from, like, the Eastern Bloc and they have all that same stuff, except for the Soviet Union, they have for the United States in Bastogne. So yeah, kind of a weird opposite land on everything. Weird for me because I've lived a lot in Eastern Europe. Yeah, so that's all I'm going to talk. Today's episode isn't quite so funny, I guess. Haha. I tried to make it lighthearted as much as I can. Got a deep subject, hard subject for a museum, but it is what it is. So I'll see you guys next week. Facetious guide. Check out the blog for a little bit more or different wordings. Check out the podcast if you prefer this in your ears. And I got the newsletter, so you'll never miss an episode. Click down there. I've also got the upcoming book, A Facetious Guide to Traveling with a Kid. And then some more. I have an upcoming horror story as well called The Wolves of Chernobyl. A lot more coming at you, so sign up for that newsletter. All right. Have a good day, and see you next week.